Hey guys, welcome back to another quiet corner of the internet. Maybe you've just turned off the lights, maybe the room's a little cooler now, fan buzzing softly, or maybe you're lying in bed letting the day melt away. Tonight we're going somewhere odd, a patch of ocean where things disappear, where explanations get slippery, and where mystery feels almost planned. You know it, the Bermuda Triangle. But here's the real question. Do we actually know what's inside it? Or are we just comforting ourselves with stories to explain the unexplainable? If you enjoy this kind of gentle, curious journey where we slow down and wonder together, go ahead and tap like, maybe subscribe or leave a thought in the comments. No pressure at all. All right, deep breath. Let's ease into the waves and see where the mystery takes us. So now that we know where the Bermuda Triangle sits, like a quiet, invisible seat reserved on the Atlantic's grand stage, it's time to ask another question. A quieter one. Where did this whole idea come from? Who looked at a stretch of perfectly normal-looking ocean and decided, yep, that's the one, that's where things go, poof. Because this triangle didn't always come with warning labels. The ocean didn't wake up one morning and whisper, time to vanish a plane. No ancient sailor carved here be triangles into their maps. In fact, the phrase Bermuda Triangle didn't even exist until the mid-20th century. The first real spark came in 1950 when an article in the Miami Herald mentioned a few mysterious disappearances, just a curious observation, really. Like someone noting that the soup tastes a little off. But it wasn't until 1964 that the term Bermuda Triangle officially entered the scene. Writer Vincent Gaddis published an article in Argosy magazine, a pulp publication known for blending facts with just enough drama to keep you from turning off the bedside lamp. Gaddis drew lines on the ocean and told tales of planes that vanished, compasses that danced like jazz musicians, and skies that swallowed whole aircraft with not even a cloud out of place. Suddenly, the triangle wasn't just a shape, it was a story. And not just any story, but one that stuck. Like gum under a school desk or the theme song to a 90s sitcom, it lodged itself into the public imagination. It had all the right ingredients: the open ocean, unexplainable vanishings, a touch of danger, and best of all, no one could prove it wrong. The ocean, after all, is notoriously tight-lipped. But here's the fun part: Gaddis didn't stop there. He turned that article into a book called Invisible Horizons, giving the triangle even more momentum. More stories, more mystery, more disappearances. Suddenly, people were looking back at old ship logs, aviation reports, and newspaper clippings, trying to fit the dots into the newly drawn triangle like it was a cosmic game of connect the dots. And the more you looked, the more you could convince yourself that something really strange was going on. Then came the 1970s. Ah yes, the golden age of polyester disco and deeply suspicious documentaries. The Bermuda Triangle made its big leap from ink on paper to glowing television screens. Leonard Nimoy's voice narrating strange disappearances on In Search Of added an extra layer of gravitas. Because when Spock tells you something might be a portal to another dimension, you listen. Bookstores had entire shelves dedicated to the triangle. Titles like The Bermuda Triangle, Mystery Solved sat right next to The Bermuda Triangle, Never to Return, which sat beside The Devil's Triangle. Because if mystery sells, devilry sells better. People gobbled it up. Suddenly, every unexplained event in the region, no matter how routine or meteorological, was swept into the triangle's legend. If a boat capsized during hurricane season, the triangle did it. If a pilot got disoriented mid-flight, triangle. If your vacation cruise ran out of shrimp cocktail, okay, maybe not that. But you get the idea. And like all good urban legends, the Bermuda Triangle didn't need to prove itself. It only needed to exist in our collective curiosity, just enough to make us glance sideways at an airline route map and go, wait a minute, isn't that where... What's fascinating is how self-sustaining the myth became. News articles would cite the triangle. People would hear about those articles and then write new ones. Books would use other books as sources. It became a hall of mirrors, each reflection lending more weight to the next. And underneath it all, that quiet stretch of ocean just kept being ocean. Vast, mysterious, unapologetically wet. You might be wondering why this area, why not some other patch of sea? Well, for one, it's busy, really busy. The region between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico is a high-traffic area for both shipping and flights. And statistically, the more activity in a region, the more likely it is that anything will eventually go wrong. Add to that the unpredictable weather, shallow shoals that mimic deeper water and strong ocean currents, and you've got a recipe for occasional disaster that doesn't need ghosts or aliens. But ghosts and aliens sure do spice things up, don't they? Over time, the triangle began to evolve. It wasn't just about missing boats anymore. It was about lost time, glowing orbs, vortexes, a plane flying into a clear sky and emerging minutes or hours ahead or behind where it was supposed to be. Pilots telling stories of instrument panels going wild, of clouds forming walls around them, of radios falling silent. Were they exaggerating? Maybe. But in storytelling, a little fog goes a long way. And the Bermuda Triangle is full of fog. The kind that isn't just water vapor, but narrative mist, where facts get slippery and our imaginations start filling in the blanks with whatever makes our hearts race just a little faster. It's like the ocean handed us a blank canvas and said, "Go ahead, paint your fears here." And, oh, we did. And the result? A cultural myth so powerful it transcended geography. The Bermuda Triangle became a metaphor for the unknown. You could say someone vanished into the Bermuda Triangle even if they just forgot to text back. It became shorthand for unsolved mysteries, for liminal spaces, for the part of the map that doesn't make sense. And isn't that in its own strange way kind of beautiful? The fact that a handful of stories stitched together with just enough mystery could ripple across decades and generations, outlasting weather patterns, radar systems, and even skepticism itself. It reminds us that humans aren't just creatures of logic. We're creatures of narrative. We don't just want explanations, we want meaning. We want the ocean to whisper to us not in forecasts and wave heights, but in riddles and half-glimpsed shadows. So, no, the Bermuda Triangle didn't begin with disappearances. It began with people, curious people looking out at a stretch of sea and wondering, what if? And maybe, just maybe that question was always more important than the answer. Let's rewind to a cold December afternoon in 1945. The war was over, but the sky still buzzed with training missions and leftover tension. On that day, 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It was supposed to be a routine exercise, nothing more than a loop out over the ocean and back. Flight 19, as they were called, had trained pilots clear weather and a simple path ahead. But something happened up there. Something that turned a textbook flight into the most famous disappearance in aviation folklore. And like all stories that linger for decades, it began not with silence, but with static on the radio. The flight was led by Lieutenant Charles Taylor, a seasoned pilot who knew his way around both cockpit and cloud. The squadron was expected to follow a triangular course east from Florida, north over the Bahamas, then back home. A trip so standard it was nicknamed Navigation Problem Number 1. But about an hour and a half after takeoff, things started to unravel. A voice crackled through the radio, disoriented, uncertain. Taylor's voice. "We can't find west. Everything is wrong. Strange. We can't be sure of any direction. Everything looks strange." Even the ocean. Not the kind of thing you want to hear from the guy steering a group of warplanes over deep water. Soon after, the tower tried to get coordinates to bring them home, but the responses were jumbled. Taylor thought they were flying over the Florida Keys. He was wrong. Dead wrong. According to Navy reports, he was flying further northeast into open ocean, and the farther they went, the more confused the transmissions became. At one point, Taylor reportedly said, "We are entering white water. Nothing seems right. We don't know where we are. The water looks green, no white." It was as if the sky itself had swallowed their sense of direction. Back at base, the sun began to dip low, and nerves began to rise. They launched a rescue mission, a giant PBM Mariner flying boat with 13 men on board. It lifted into the sky with searchlights and hope. And it vanished too. Just like that. No mayday, no wreckage, two disappearances in a single night, one after the other. It was almost cinematic if it weren't so real. And here's where the legend really begins to thicken like fog on the sea. The official Navy investigation concluded that Flight 19 was lost in sea for unknown reasons. That's the actual phrase, unknown reasons, which, if you think about it, is just vague enough to keep you up at night. Conspiracy theorists pounced. Some said the planes flew into a time warp. Others believed they were abducted by extraterrestrials. Some whispered about Atlantis, because of course Atlantis is always on standby when strange ocean stuff happens. And yet if you strip away the mystery and just look at the human side, the Flight 19 story becomes something else entirely. A story of tired men, faulty compasses, cloud cover, and miscommunication. Taylor, as it turns out, had gotten lost before. He wasn't flying his usual plane that day, and according to some reports, he refused to switch to emergency channels when things went south. Some of the pilots in the formation were new, inexperienced. There may have even been a critical malfunction in their direction-finding gear. But mystery doesn't need perfect logic, it just needs space to grow. And the Bermuda Triangle offered plenty of that. Over the decades, the story of Flight 19 has been told and retold like a bedtime story for conspiracy theorists. And each time it becomes a little more magical, a little more eerie. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We sand down the edges of reality until the story fits our imagination. 5 planes and a rescue craft vanish over a single stretch of sea, and suddenly the ocean becomes a mouth with an appetite. Maybe what makes Flight 19 so powerful is the silence that followed. No black boxes, no floating wreckage, just the deep Atlantic shrugging its shoulders. It's the kind of silence that makes you lean forward and squint into the mist. The kind that says, "You'll never know." But isn't it fun to wonder? And really, that's what the Bermuda Triangle is all about. Not just the fear of disappearance, but the poetry of possibility. Of knowing that sometimes, even in a world of satellites and data, the ocean still has secrets. And it's not done keeping them. So next time you hear a plane overhead or see a dot moving across your flight tracker app, just know it could be Flight 19 flying eternal circuits through the clouds looking for home. Or maybe it's just Delta Flight 247 to Tampa. Either way, the sky still remembers, and so do we. Some vanishings leave behind fragments. A wing here, a lifeboat there, a single shoe washed ashore. But others disappear like breath on a cold window there, 1 second gone the next, and the more you stare, the more you wonder if they were ever really there to begin with. The Bermuda Triangle has a curious way of holding on to things. Planes, ships, even logic, especially logic. And if Flight 19 was the case that brought the spotlight, it wasn't alone under that wide and patient sky. No, the Triangle's guest list is long. Let's walk gently through the archives together. We'll go slowly. No sudden turns, just a quiet stroll among the vanishings. Let's start with the USS Cyclops. A name like that deserves drama, and oh, it got it. In March of 1918, this massive U.S. Navy collier, a ship designed to carry coal, set sail from Barbados with over 300 men aboard. It was big, steel-plated, sturdy, safe, and it was never seen again. No distress calls, no debris, no hints, just nothing. It left the harbor, and then the ocean whispered, "Mine." Some theories blame a storm, others point to enemy submarines, but no wreckage has ever been found, not a single rivet, not a scrap of hull. It's as if the sea swallowed it whole and then licked its lips. What makes the Cyclops even eerier is that 2 of its sister ships also vanished in similar circumstances years later. Same design, same general region, same complete lack of explanation, which makes you wonder, was it bad luck, bad engineering, or something else entirely? Fast forward to 1948. A British South American Airways plane. The Star Tiger took off from the Azores headed for Bermuda. Weather was fine, radio was calm. The pilot even checked in, reporting a routine flight. But just before reaching its destination, radio silence. Forever. A year later, almost identically, another plane, the Star Ariel, vanished between Bermuda and Jamaica. Same airline, same model, same mystery. No crash site, no bodies. Just two planes that should have landed and never did. If it sounds like déjà vu, that's because it is. The triangle doesn't play fair, but it does play consistently strange. Then there's the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a tanker carrying molten sulfur, already not the coziest of cargoes. In 1963, it left Beaumont, Texas, bound for Norfolk, Virginia. It passed through the edge of the triangle and then vanished. The Coast Guard searched over 300,000 square miles of ocean and found only a few life preservers. No ship, no crew, nothing else. What makes the Sulphur Queen special, aside from the name that sounds like a forgotten drag performer, is the heat, literally. Carrying tons of molten sulfur in aging tanks isn't exactly a low-risk gig. Investigators suspected the ship may have exploded mid-sea. But without wreckage, that theory remains just that, a theory. One more question to hang in the salty air. And not all vanishings were dramatic. Some were subtle, quiet. The kind that makes your skin prickle, not because of what you see, but because of what you don't. In 1991, a pilot flying a Grumman Cougar jet disappeared on radar just minutes after takeoff near the triangle's western edge. No distress call, no bad weather, just a blip and then no blip. You almost wonder if the plane simply peeled off. The map shrugged and said, "I'm done." It's a strange feeling to know that steel fuel and a human life can vanish without ceremony. But the Bermuda Triangle isn't always greedy. Sometimes it gives things back, sort of. There was the case of the Douglas DC-3 in 1948 en route from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami. It vanished with 32 people aboard. No wreckage was ever found, but some believe the plane never really left. In the years that followed, multiple pilots reported seeing a ghostly DC-3 in the skylights, on no identification, flying too low, then disappearing into clouds that weren't there a second before. Did those sightings mean anything, or were they simply echoes in the minds of tired pilots? It's hard to say. The sky, like the sea, has a sense of humor we don't always understand. If you're starting to feel a pattern here, that's because there is one. Ships and planes that were fine one moment, then gone the next. Sometimes in storms, sometimes in clear skies, sometimes with radio contact right up until the end, and sometimes with nothing but eerie silence, the kind that presses against your ears like deep water. It's not about one single incident. It's about the accumulation, the repetition, the echo. And in those echoes, we hear something very human, our need to explain the unexplainable. Because mystery is magnetic. It draws us in even as it makes us shiver. We try to map it, we chart it, we feed it with books and documentaries and internet threads. We name it the triangle as if giving it a shape makes it safer, more manageable. But shape doesn't always mean boundaries. Especially out there where the sky kisses the water and everything feels a little bit sideways. Maybe it's not about geography at all. Maybe it's about perception. We notice disappearances here because someone once drew a triangle, and our brains love patterns. We're storytellers by nature. We remember the strange. We forget the mundane. Still, it's hard to ignore the volume. The sheer number of reports. And the emotion they carry: confusion, disbelief, fear. These weren't fairy tales told around campfires. These were trained professionals, military and civilian, who found themselves face to face with something that didn't play by the usual rules. And maybe that's the real point. The Bermuda Triangle isn't just a place. It's a mood, a moment, a wrinkle in routine. It reminds us that despite our technology, our confidence, and our maps, there are still places where things go missing, where silence is louder than answers, where the ocean keeps its secrets, and we keep asking. Let's pause for a moment, not to catch our breath, but to notice something interesting. Whenever a mystery grows big enough, it starts a quiet war, not a loud one with armies or flags, but a soft, persistent tug of war between believers and skeptics. And the Bermuda Triangle. Oh, it's been the battlefield of many such whispered arguments. At dinner tables on long flights, in rainy classrooms. One side says, "This place is cursed." The other says, "It's just weather." And both look at the same facts, the same ocean, and walk away with two very different stories. That's the beauty and the burden of a good mystery. It doesn't care who wins. The theories came quickly like raindrops on the hull of a ship. Some were logical, grounded, wearing lab coats and glasses. Others wore tinfoil hats and carried maps of Atlantis. But all of them in their own way tried to explain why this one stretch of sea seemed hungrier than the rest. The first group of theories pointed to nature. Because, let's be honest, nature is weird. And the Atlantic Ocean is not a place known for its hospitality. Violent storms can form quickly, seemingly out of nowhere, especially over warm waters like those in the Gulf Stream. There are downbursts, rogue waves, microbursts, terms that sound like they belong to science fiction but are very real, very sudden, and very good at flipping ships or pulling planes into the deep. Some researchers suggested that strong underwater currents could scatter wreckage across miles, making recovery nearly impossible. It's not that the planes didn't crash, it's that we simply couldn't find the pieces. Then there's the magnetic mystery. Compasses going haywire. Instruments acting like they've had one too many espressos. The Bermuda Triangle sits near one of the few places on Earth where true north and magnetic north occasionally align. This can cause compass errors for pilots who don't compensate. Not quite supernatural, just inconvenient. Especially when you're 10,000 feet up squinting at dials while your fuel gauge hums a lullaby. Add to that the possibility of human error, fatigue, miscommunication, bad judgment, and suddenly even the most haunting disappearances start to look a little more human. Less alien mothership, more oops, wrong turn. But of course, not everyone is satisfied with those answers, because human error can explain a crash. It doesn't explain a pattern, or the silence, or why some disappearances seem to happen under the calmest, clearest skies. That's when the more, colorful theories step in. Atlantis is a fan favorite. Some believe the lost civilization isn't just lost, it's active, hidden beneath the waves, using advanced technology to pull ships down like a child tugging toy boats in the bathtub. Others point skyward. UFOs, abductions, invisible tractor beams, because if the ocean won't talk, maybe something above it will. And then there's the time warp theory. Pilots have reported strange clouds, sudden shifts in light, even lost time. One man claimed his plane leapt forward hundreds of miles in just a few minutes, like space itself folded and sent him through a shortcut. Was it real? A malfunction? A daydream? It's hard to say, but when you're gliding over endless blue, reality can start to feel stretchy. And somewhere between the scientists and the saucer watchers are the quiet skeptics, the ones who don't write books or make YouTube documentaries. They just raise an eyebrow and say, it's probably just a statistical illusion. They point out that the Bermuda Triangle is one of the most heavily traveled shipping lanes in the world. More traffic means more accidents, period. Some even argue that per mile the rate of disappearances isn't unusually high at all. It just feels that way because we've been taught to look, to pay attention, like a magician making you watch the left hand while the right one hides the coin. It's not that more things vanish here, it's that more vanishings here become famous. And yet, despite all the rationality, the neat graphs, the well-worded articles, the triangle refuses to be tamed. It stays slippery. Just when you think you've filed it under solved, someone finds another plane, another ship, another strange radio transmission from decades past, echoing like a ghost across frequencies. Maybe it's not about which theory is right. Maybe it's about how they all whisper together, layering the mystery like waves on top of waves. In the end, the Bermuda Triangle's greatest trick might not be disappearing planes. It might be keeping everyone arguing about why. Because nothing fuels a legend quite like a tug-of-war with no winner. Let's talk about waves. Not the gentle kind that lap at your feet when you're standing ankle-deep at the beach holding a half-melted ice cream. No, I'm talking about the other kind. The kind that doesn't knock politely, but kicks down the door. The kind that sailors whisper about in bunk beds and oceanographers still find hard to believe rogue waves. Some call them freak waves, others prefer the term monster waves. Whatever name you give them, one thing remains. They're big, very big. And if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, they don't knock you down, they erase you. For decades, rogue waves lived in that hazy space between myth and reality. Sailors told tales of walls of water rising from calm seas of ships swallowed whole with barely a splash, but scientists, bless their logical hearts, chalked it up to exaggeration. Salt-soaked storytelling. Until the year 2000, when a wave measuring over 80 feet slammed into the Draupner oil platform off the coast of Norway. It wasn't folklore. It was recorded, measured, confirmed. Suddenly the stories didn't seem so salty after all. So what exactly is a rogue wave? It's not just a big wave. It's a wave that appears suddenly without warning in the middle of otherwise ordinary conditions. It defies the rules of average wave height. It's like showing up to a dinner party where everyone's in jeans and someone crashes in wearing a tuxedo, screaming in Latin. It doesn't fit. And that's what makes it dangerous. In the Bermuda Triangle, rogue waves may be more than just unwelcome guests, they could be repeat offenders. The region is home to strong ocean currents, fast-changing weather systems, and plenty of underwater geography that encourages energy to gather stew, and then boom, explode upward into a sudden, towering wave. Some of these waves have been estimated at 100 feet high. That's roughly a 10-story building made entirely of water and bad intentions. Imagine a cargo ship just minding its business, cruising through blue water on a calm afternoon. The crew's probably joking about dinner, the cook's making something suspicious with beans, and someone's falling asleep at the radar screen. Then, without warning, the horizon folds. A wall of water surges up, black foaming, taller than anything the ship was built to face. There's no time to turn, no time to radio, no time to say goodbye. One moment you're on a ship, the next you're under the ocean in a world of bubbles and pressure and silence. Now imagine you're in a plane flying low, trying to land near the water. A rogue wave rises below you, not high enough to hit, but enough to create a massive column of spray, an updraft, a distortion in radar. Instruments flicker. Turbulence kicks, visibility drops, a pilot makes a wrong adjustment, and suddenly a flight path becomes a vanishing point. The scary thing, these waves don't leave much behind, maybe a chunk of hull, a cracked life preserver, but usually they erase their own evidence. Like professional hitmen of the ocean, no witnesses, no noise, just the steady, indifferent churn of the sea closing over the scene. Some researchers now believe that rogue waves may explain more Bermuda Triangle disappearances than we ever gave them credit for, especially for large vessels like the USS Cyclops or the Marine Sulphur Queen that vanished without a trace. It makes sense. These ships weren't fragile. They were industrial monsters. But even monsters can be eaten by something bigger. And rogue waves don't just knock, they crush. But of course, as with all things triangle, not everyone agrees. Some say the numbers don't add up, that rogue waves are too rare, that they couldn't account for the eerie regularity of vanishings. Others argue that it's not about how often the waves form, but how unnoticed they remain. Because how do you count something that destroys itself the moment it finishes destroying something else? Still, there's something elegant about the rogue wave theory. It's natural, it's terrifying, and it's real. It doesn't ask you to believe in aliens or ancient civilizations. It just asks you to believe that the ocean, vast, moody, and magnificently unpredictable, occasionally loses its temper. And when it does, it doesn't care how advanced your radar is or how many escape drills you've practiced. The truth is, the sea has always had moods. Some days it's a soft lullaby. Other days it's jazz, wild, erratic, and impossible to dance to. Rogue waves are its crescendos, brief, brutal, beautiful in a terrifying way. They remind us that even in the age of satellites and supercomputers, the planet still has surprises, still has power, still has secrets it keeps locked behind waves we never see coming. So the next time you're near the water and the surface is calm, almost too calm, just remember, rogue waves don't announce themselves. They don't give interviews. They just rise, roar, and return to the deep, leaving only questions behind. And perhaps if you listen closely to the wind skimming across the water, you'll hear them whisper, "I was never supposed to exist." If there's one sound that really shouldn't surprise you when you're flying a plane over the ocean, it's the steady ticking of a compass needle. That calm, unwavering click, pointing ever north, whispering, "This way." You're fine. But imagine you're up there, thousands of feet above blue nothingness, and suddenly the needle wobbles. Just a little at first, a tiny twitch, then more. Then it spins like it's dancing, like it forgot the choreography. Now you're not just flying, you're guessing. And in the Bermuda Triangle, that tiny wobble has become part of the legend. One of the earliest theories about the disappearances in the triangle doesn't involve monsters or myth, just magnets. Or, more specifically, magnetic anomalies. It sounds technical, and it also sounds like something you'd blame when your GPS sends you to a cow pasture instead of your hotel. But the idea is simple. Compasses sometimes get confused. And in certain parts of the world, they don't point to magnetic north like they're supposed to. They point to true north or somewhere in between. That's not a glitch. That's just Earth being well lumpy. Earth's magnetic field isn't perfectly uniform. It's like a giant ball of iron with mood swings. Some regions are more magnetically intense, others are a bit lazy. And the Bermuda Triangle. For some time, it sat close to one of the few places where magnetic north and true north lined up, a phenomenon known as agonic lines. The idea goes like this: if a pilot was using a magnetic compass and didn't account for this alignment, or the sudden shifts that might happen, it could cause them to veer off course. A little deviation over a long stretch of ocean. That's a lot of wrong, especially in the days before GPS, when a compass was your best and sometimes only friend in the sky. Of course, not everyone agrees that magnetic anomalies alone can explain the triangle's mysteries. For one, agonic lines aren't fixed, they move over time. The exact alignment near the triangle has shifted since the early 20th century. And modern compasses, while still vulnerable, are usually supported by backup instruments, GPS, and navigation systems that would throw a red flag if something went haywire. But back in the 1940s or even the 60s, not so much. A few degrees off could mean missing land entirely, heading deeper into the blue, into silence, into a story, one that doesn't end with a landing strip and a handshake, but with blinking fuel gauges and a rising panic that no one wants to admit out loud. But what if it's not just compasses? Some have proposed that there's something more profound happening here. Geomagnetic pulses, fluctuations, or energy fields that play tricks on electronics. Kind of like the Bermuda Triangle's own private prank show. Pilots have reported sudden malfunctions in brand new planes, radio blackouts, altimeters going bonkers. Entire navigation panels lighting up like Christmas trees in July only to reset moments later when they're out of the zone. These stories are difficult to confirm, but they persist. And what's more mysterious than instruments failing only when you're not supposed to look? There are also whispers of something stranger. Magnetism not just affecting hardware, but humans. Disorientation, nausea, a strange fog not physical but mental, as if the mind, like the compass, begins to drift, losing direction not just on a map, but inside your own thoughts. It's the kind of detail that makes skeptics roll their eyes and storytellers lean forward. Because what if magnetism isn't just a mechanical hiccup, but an invitation to get lost? Still, for all the speculation, there's one thing we can agree on. Navigating the sea, especially by air, is a delicate dance of trust between pilot and plane, between machine and magnet, and when that balance tips, even a small misalignment can feel enormous. A few degrees off in a car and you hit a dead end. A few degrees off over the ocean and you disappear. No phone signal, no tire tracks, just horizon. Pilots often talk about their instruments as extensions of their own senses. When those instruments falter even briefly, it's like going blind in one eye, hearing static where there should be speech, feeling the ground shift when there's no ground at all. The Bermuda Triangle's reputation has turned the compass, a simple, noble needle, into a question mark, spinning slowly, whispering doubt, pointing somewhere, but never quite saying where. And if that doesn't make your palms a little sweaty, you probably haven't flown enough over water. So maybe the mystery isn't whether magnetism is the villain, but how easily a small silent error can become the opening note in a much louder story. One told has in headlines, in search efforts, in families still waiting for answers. Maybe it's not about magnetic anomalies. Maybe it's about how easily we lose our way when the one thing we trust our sense of direction starts to feel like it's lying. Or maybe the compass isn't spinning at all. Maybe we are. The ocean floor is not as peaceful as it looks from above. Beneath all that serene, glittering blue lies a world that fizzes, cracks, bulges, and occasionally explodes. And no, that's not exaggeration. One of the most surprising theories to emerge about the Bermuda Triangle doesn't involve monsters' magnetic fields or mischievous aliens. It involves gas, specifically methane. More specifically, frozen methane trapped in the seabed, waiting for just the right moment to throw a tantrum. Let's imagine something. You're floating over the calm waters of the Atlantic. The sky is clear, your ship humming gently along. Below you, thousands of feet beneath the surface, is a patch of seafloor that holds what scientists call methane hydrate, a crystalline substance that looks like ice, but is actually natural gas frozen in water molecules under high pressure. These deposits exist all over the world, but in certain regions, like parts of the Bermuda Triangle, they form big, unstable patches. Think of them like pockets of fizzy soda sealed tight inside the earth. Now picture the cap popping off. When these hydrates destabilize, maybe due to a slight temperature shift, a slide in the seabed, or even the pressure of a passing vessel, they release massive amounts of methane gas into the water. Not gradually, not politely, suddenly. Like shaking a soda bottle and cracking it open all at once. That methane rushes upward in giant bubbles, and if you happen to be sailing right above one well, let's just say your ship might find itself in a bad mood. Why? Because when enough methane saturates the water beneath a ship, it drastically reduces the water's density. Ships stay afloat thanks to buoyancy, and buoyancy depends on water density. Replace water with gas, and suddenly your very solid vessel behaves like a stone dropped into thin air. It doesn't sink, it plummets. Fast, without warning, without resistance, and without time to call for help. There's no explosion, no fire, just a quiet collapse. A ship that was visible one moment becomes a memory the next. And the ocean, it just swirls, sighs, and covers its tracks like nothing happened. Even search teams might find nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no debris, just silence. And that's part of what makes the methane hydrate theory so eerily elegant. It doesn't require supernatural forces. It doesn't need alien spacecraft, or rogue waves, or magnetic confusion. It just needs chemistry and a little bad timing. There's even some precedent. In lab simulations, ships placed over methane-saturated water dropped like lead. No warning, no bobbing, just gone. And while we've never directly observed one of these gas blowouts happening in real time under a ship, the conditions absolutely exist. The Bermuda Triangle sits on continental shelves with sharp drops, shifting sediments, and signs of previous methane activity. And while such events might be rare doesn't mean impossible. It just means unexpected. And unexpected is exactly what the Bermuda Triangle seems to specialize in. Now, some critics argue that the theory is too convenient, that it can't explain aircraft disappearances. After all, methane doesn't rise into the sky in great invisible hands to swat planes from the clouds, right? Well, maybe not. Some scientists have proposed that massive gas eruptions could, under certain conditions, affect atmospheric composition, briefly destabilizing engines, reducing lift, or messing with onboard instruments. It's speculative, but not implausible. Nature, after all, doesn't always play by our tidy categories, and maybe that's the point. This isn't just a story about frozen gas. It's about how much we still don't know. The ocean floor is one of the least explored regions on Earth. We've mapped the surface of the moon more thoroughly than the bottom of the sea. There could be entire pockets, entire ecosystems of geological drama playing out below us, and we wouldn't even notice until a ship vanished or a tremor rattled the coast. And even then, we'd probably just blame it on the triangle. There's something humbling in that, to know that beneath calm waves lies a world in motion, a sleeping beast of pressure and chemistry. Sometimes it growls, sometimes it yawns, and sometimes, very rarely, it breathes upward in one great invisible sigh, and something on the surface goes missing. So maybe the triangle isn't cursed, maybe it's just misunderstood. A place where geology gets theatrical, where gas and gravity conspire to remind us that the ocean doesn't owe us an explanation. It simply does what it does, and we float on top like ants on soup, hoping the bubbles stay down. And when they don't, when they rise silently and violently, we write stories, we search, we theorize, we whisper about disappearances and draw triangles on maps. Because it's easier to name the shape than to face the fact that sometimes the ground beneath the sea simply lets go. No malice, no magic, just methane. Let's let our minds drift a little now, out past the borders of maps and the reach of weather balloons, past radar and reason. Because some stories that come out of the Bermuda Triangle aren't about storms or waves or vanishing into the sea. Some are about something even stranger time. Not the ticking clock kind of time, the other kind, the stretchable kind, the kind that slips through your fingers or folds itself like laundry when no one's watching. There have been whispers, many in fact, of pilots who flew into clouds and came out minutes or hours later completely disoriented, their instruments blinking like they had a secret to tell but didn't know how. One of the most talked about stories is that of Bruce Gernon, a pilot flying from the Bahamas to Florida in 1970. He was cruising steadily in his small plane when, ahead of him, a strange cloud began to form. Not a storm, not a thunderhead, just different. He described it as a tunnel, a kind of vortex. And as he flew through it, the world outside became hazy, gray electric. Instruments went wild. Time felt slow and fast at the same time, like someone had pressed both the pause and fast-forward buttons on reality. When he emerged, he was nearly 100 miles farther along his route than he should have been. He hadn't used that much fuel. The radar hadn't picked him up until he popped out. And he arrived much earlier than expected, with no real explanation. His story isn't unique. There have been similar accounts, though fewer and far between, of pilots and sailors who claim to have experienced missing time or sudden jumps in location. One described a sensation like being lifted and moved without movement. Another swore his watch spun rapidly during a brief fog, only to reset itself when the mist cleared. Skeptics, of course, roll their eyes. They point to spatial disorientation, to malfunctioning instruments, to the human brain's incredible ability to fill in the blanks with nonsense when it lacks context. But what if it's not nonsense? What if some places on Earth really do behave differently? The idea of time warps sounds like science fiction, but the physics of space-time, thanks to our friend Einstein, isn't as straightforward as we once believed. Gravity can bend time, speed can stretch it, and if the conditions are just right, perhaps a strange convergence of magnetic fields, atmospheric pressure, and who knows what else, maybe little wrinkles in reality can appear. Brief, unstable, but just long enough for a small plane to dip in and out without even knowing it. Scientists call this kind of speculation fringe. But sometimes the fringe is where the most interesting patterns are stitched. It's not that time travel is proven, it's that we don't fully understand the fabric yet. And what is the Bermuda Triangle, if not one giant unironed patch in the quilt of the world? There's also something poetic in the idea that people might not just vanish, but slip. That somewhere, somehow, a misstep in the air or on the sea doesn't lead to destruction, but displacement. That maybe there's another version of reality out there, where a pilot is still flying a ship, is still sailing, unaware that the stars above them don't quite match the charts. Maybe they didn't crash. Maybe they crossed. It's a dreamy thought, sure, but dreams have always been where science begins. Of course, none of this has been proven. There are no equations that tell us when and where these time ripples occur. No footage of a ship folding into the fabric of space-time. Just anecdotes. Just voices on old tapes. Just the look in a pilot's eyes when they say, "It felt like something wasn't right," and then it was over. But sometimes when the data falls short and the ocean stays silent, all we have are those stories. And maybe that's enough. Not to solve the mystery, but to honor it, because believing in the possibility of time behaving badly is also believing in the unknown. And the unknown is what makes the Bermuda Triangle so endlessly fascinating. So perhaps the triangle isn't just a place where things disappear. Maybe it's a place where time itself forgets the rules, where a second becomes an hour, where a minute loops like a song stuck on repeat, where the sky folds in a little and says, "Not this way," and then unfolds again like nothing ever happened, and you're left there flying, sailing, breathing, wondering why your watch feels heavier, or why the world suddenly smells like it remembers something you don't. Sometimes the stories that linger the longest aren't the ones filled with special effects or dramatic music. They're the quiet ones, the ones told in soft voices with long pauses, the ones that begin with, "I know this sounds strange, but..." Because some people didn't vanish in the Bermuda Triangle. They came back, and what they brought with them wasn't proof, but something far more haunting, a feeling. Ask any seasoned pilot or sailor, and you'll hear it just below the surface. A memory they don't like to revisit, a weird shift in the air, a strange weight in the chest, instruments going off for no reason, the sky looking wrong, and for a few brief minutes, reality behaving like it forgot its own lines. One pilot described flying through a clear sky when his cockpit dimmed, not dark, not cloudy, but dim, like someone had turned down the brightness on the world. The horizon became blurry. His compass spun, the radio hissed static. Then just as suddenly it all cleared. He was miles off course and minutes had vanished. Another described a kind of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind. The kind that presses on your ears and makes your heartbeat sound louder than the engines. He said the clouds closed around him like curtains. Not storm clouds, not violent, just enclosing. And then he was out of it, just like that, nothing broken, nothing missing, except time. One of the most famous modern stories comes from a man named Don Henry. In 2005, he was piloting a small aircraft near Bimini when his onboard systems began to act strangely. His GPS showed erratic data. His compass refused to settle. Even the artificial horizon began to tilt, despite no real turbulence. Outside the window, he saw what he described as a cloud tunnel, a perfectly symmetrical opening in a surrounding mass of cloud. Against better judgment, he flew into it. He said it felt like moving through molasses, the air thick, the sound muffled, and then he was through. His instruments returned. The sky cleared. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, but a full 20 minutes ahead of schedule. No engine change, no fuel drop, no tailwind explanation, just early and deeply unsettled. These stories don't often make headlines. They don't come with footage or black boxes or neatly drawn conclusions. What they come with is something much harder to quantify: unease. These are people trained to trust instruments to measure everything. And yet here they are, describing experiences that slip between the cracks of logic like water through fingers. They're not looking for fame. Most wish they hadn't experienced it at all. They just want to understand why things stopped making sense for a few moments that for some never really left them. Because some feelings cling. A certain color in the sky, a low hum in the engine that wasn't really there, the feeling that you were being watched, not by eyes, but by the place itself. And it's not just pilots. Sailors, too, have their stories. Of compasses spinning, of stars shifting, of fog that moved like it had intent, of sudden stillness, wind dropping water, flattening as if the sea was holding its breath. Some say they heard faint voices on the radio. Others felt they were being followed by something just beneath the surface. No sonar reading, no shadow, just a presence. Try explaining that in a Coast Guard report. Try telling someone you saw a shape in the water that didn't cast a ripple, that your engine died and then started again for no reason, that your watch ran backward for a few minutes. These are not the kind of things you tell strangers. These are the kind of things you whisper to someone after midnight when you're tired enough to stop editing your memories. And what unites all these stories isn't proof, it's emotion. Not fear exactly, though there is that, but awe, confusion, a deep sense of something isn't right. That feeling you get when you walk into a room and forget why you're there. Multiply that by 100, and imagine it stretched across open water or wrapped in cloud. That's the Bermuda Triangle, for those who live to talk about it. Not a place of monsters, but a place where the veil feels thin, where things almost make sense but don't, where you come back different even if everything looks the same. Maybe that's the scariest thing of all, not the disappearances, but the reappearances. The people who return holding something they can't quite name, something they carry quietly for years, a story they don't always share. Until one night, maybe over a late coffee or under a blanket of stars, they lean in and say, "I never told anyone this before, but let's go under for a bit." Not metaphorically, not emotionally, just down, beneath the surface, past the sparkle and shimmer, into the place where sunlight doesn't quite reach, and everything moves like it's dreaming. Because for all the stories that take place above the water, in the air, in the clouds on the open sea, there's something about what might be resting below that makes the Bermuda Triangle even more mysterious. You see, people have been scanning the floor of this stretch of ocean for decades, with sonar, with submersibles, with questions, and every now and then something strange appears. A shape, a structure, a shadow that doesn't belong. Sonar doesn't tell stories. It paints pictures in echoes, blurry outlines, curves, angles, hints. And in the triangle, some of those pictures suggest that the seabed might not be as natural as it pretends to be. In 1968, off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas, divers discovered what looked like a road, giant rectangular stones laid out in a pattern. Too straight, too clean. The formation, dubbed the Bimini Road, immediately sparked theories. Some said it was an ancient dock or the remains of a sunken wall. Others swore it was part of Atlantis, a breadcrumb left behind by a forgotten civilization, swallowed by the sea. Skeptics argued it was just naturally occurring beach rock, split by erosion and placed by currents. But when you're swimming along a perfect underwater causeway that stretches for hundreds of feet, logic sometimes has to wait its turn. Because it feels old, it feels intentional, and it feels like it's not finished telling its story. Further reports emerged over the years of pyramid-like shapes picked up on sonar. Massive symmetrical objects resting silently on the seafloor, some with angles too precise to be natural, some with surfaces that seemed unnaturally smooth. There were even whispers about two glass-like pyramids larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, allegedly discovered deep below the surface. No photos, no confirmed location, just sonar images and the kind of silence that hums. That silence you hear when someone knows something but isn't saying it. Then there are the sonar shadows, dark anomalies that appear and vanish between scans. Things too big to be marine life, too solid to be explained away as rock formations, blips that move or disappear or come back in different places. To scientists, they're just glitches. To dreamers, they're sleeping giants, leftover relics of a world older than memory. Machines, arcs, or ruins of something not quite human. And as our technology improves, the ocean gives us more, not answers, but better questions. 3D sonar imaging has revealed vast ridges, trenches, and dome-like shapes below the triangle. Some are explained, others not so much. A few expeditions have even reported magnetic disturbances around certain underwater formations, compasses that spin, batteries that drain, cameras that refuse to work until the craft is miles away. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the ocean just has rules we haven't learned yet. It's easy to forget how little we know about the seafloor. More than 80% of the Earth's ocean floor remains unexplored. That's not a metaphor, that's a fact. We've walked on the moon, we've mapped Mars, but right here beneath the blue outside your airplane window are miles and miles of unvisited alien terrain. If something were hiding down there, ancient tech lost cities, evidence of a civilization the tides erased, we wouldn't know. Not because we're not looking, but because the ocean doesn't give up its secrets easily. Sometimes I imagine the ocean like a great librarian, one that doesn't use words or shelves, but silence and depth. And somewhere down there in the quiet dark are stories etched into stone, sunken rooms with ceilings of coral, staircases that lead nowhere, pyramids made not of brick, but of pressure and myth. And maybe, just maybe, when we aim our sonar beams and get back a strange shadow, it's the ocean gently tapping back, saying, yes, there's something here, but not yet, not today. So we catalog the shadows, we speculate, we argue, and the ocean watches, still, patient, waiting. And whether it's Atlantis or a trick of geology or something stranger than either, we keep diving. Because the mystery isn't just what's down there, it's why we feel the need to know. Why we keep listening to sonar echoes like children, pressing a seashell to our ears, hoping for something more than just the sound of the sea. If you want to know what's really going on in a place like the Bermuda Triangle, you follow the people who are paid not to get lost, the ones with the training, the tech, and the need to keep moving forward no matter what. You follow the Navy. Because for decades now, the U.S. Navy has quietly passed through, flown over and studied the waters of the Triangle like it's just another patch of ocean. But if you look closely, just a little closer, you start to notice something odd. Not loud, not obvious, but quiet. Too quiet. Like a room that looks normal until you realize all the furniture's been nailed to the floor. Officially, the Navy doesn't acknowledge anything unusual about the Bermuda Triangle. It's just ocean. Business as usual. Pilots train there, ships cross it daily, submarines slip silently beneath. And they'll tell you, if asked, that everything is fine, that the Triangle is not considered an area of unusual danger. But the question isn't what they say. It's what they don't. You won't find much in public naval briefings. No official memos marked Triangle Risk Elevated. No classified satellite photos with red circles. But sometimes, if you read between the lines, you find shapes in the static. Take the fact that the Navy has one of its most important underwater testing ranges right on the edge of the Bermuda Triangle. UTEC, the Atlantic Undersea Test and Evaluation Center. It's located in Andros Island, Bahamas. On paper, it's just a facility for testing submarines, weapon system sonar. You know the usual. But to those who dig a little deeper, AUTEC is often called the Underwater Area 51, a place of strange readings, of experiments that leave no trails, of surveillance planes flying in circles with no explanation. Coincidence possibly. But why put a major undersea lab there, of all places? Why in a region with such a strong reputation for the inexplicable? Is it because the Navy believes in the myths, or because they've been watching them longer than anyone else? Some former Navy personnel speaking off the record have described briefings that didn't match the public script, warnings to avoid certain areas during training flights, mentions of instrument irregularities that weren't to be reported in logbooks. There are even a few declassified documents, fragmented and dry, that reference electromagnetic interference during deep-sea equipment trials. Not conclusive, but curious. And then there are the search missions. Whenever a civilian plane goes missing, the Coast Guard responds. But for certain disappearances, the Navy joins in quietly, swiftly, and without much press. The involvement is usually brief. A few flyovers, some ship sweeps, then radio silence. The mission closes. And no one really explains what they did or didn't find. It's not suspicious in the dramatic movie way. It's suspicious in the why is there a lock on this drawer that says it's empty kind of way. The thing is, militaries don't chase ghost stories. They don't spend billions unless there's something to spend it on. So either the Triangle is home to strategic value we don't understand, or it holds questions they're still trying to answer. Or maybe it's both. And we have to ask, what would the Navy do if they did find something, say a vortex, a magnetic disturbance, a relic of an ancient machine buried beneath coral and silence? Would they tell us? Or would they label it, tag it, and sink it deeper beneath classification and concrete? Not out of malice, not out of fear, but simply because that's what militaries do. They secure, they control, they contain. There's something almost poetic in that. The idea that somewhere in a gray building someone knows exactly what happened to Flight 19. That there's a dusty file full of diagrams and sonar scans labeled something vague like Project Cobalt. And that while we trade stories on the internet, someone in a windowless room is watching the triangle flicker on a screen like a quiet, pulsing heartbeat they still haven't figured out. Because maybe the biggest mystery isn't what's happening in the Bermuda Triangle. It's who already knows and why they're keeping it to themselves. Every mystery has its myth. And every myth has that one name you say in a hushed tone like it might answer back. In the Bermuda Triangle, that name is Atlantis. It's the elephant under the ocean, the whisper behind every strange sonar reading, the word that always seems to drift to the surface when all other explanations sink. Atlantis, the lost city. The sunken world, the civilization swallowed whole by the sea, and depending on who you ask, lost to time or hidden on purpose. The legend of Atlantis is old, older than most of our maps. First told by Plato around 360 BC, he described a powerful civilization, advanced wealthy, radiant with temples and technology that angered the gods and was buried beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. Some say it was a parable, others say it was a memory, and some believe it wasn't lost, just moved. You see, if you look at a modern map of the Atlantic Ocean, especially that slice between the U.S. and the Caribbean, something strange appears. Long ridges beneath the water, sunken on plateaus. Perfectly aligned shapes that don't quite feel accidental. Geologists call them sea floor features, ancient volcanic ranges, collapsed land masses. But others, those who spend their evenings scanning satellite images and dreaming of forgotten worlds, believe they're ruins. Foundations, roads, maybe even the last bones of Atlantis hiding beneath coral and time. The Bermuda Triangle, they say, sits right where Atlantis once was, or where it sank, or where it slipped between dimensions. Theories stretch wide. Some say Atlantis used powerful crystal energy technology we've long forgotten, that their machines buried deep still pulse, interfering with our compasses, our instruments, our sense of time. Others say Atlantis was never a city, but a kind of gateway, a nexus of knowledge, and that the triangle isn't just a graveyard, it's a lock, a veil stretched over something the earth doesn't want found. Skeptics, of course, will tell you there's no evidence. That Plato's story was a moral lesson, not a geographic clue. That we've searched the seafloor and found rocks, not ruins. But sometimes it's not about what's found, it's about what's almost found. A road that ends abruptly, a stone that's too square, a magnetic field that spikes without reason. A rumor repeated across cultures, from Egypt to the Andes to Polynesia, about lands lost to the sea, cities that fell when the stars shifted towers that lit the night and then disappeared forever. And isn't it strange? Just a little how often our myths circle the ocean. How many ancient texts speak of cataclysms, floods, sunken kingdoms, and gods who retreated into the deep. It's almost as if the sea has been hiding stories for far longer than we've known how to write them down. Whether you believe Atlantis was real or metaphor, the connection to the Bermuda Triangle lingers like perfume in an old room. Some divers swear they've seen archways on the seafloor. Others describe statues, walls, patterns too symmetrical to be nature's doing. And some say that when they swam close, their instruments died, their heads rang, and a strange calm washed over them like standing in a cathedral with no roof. Maybe Atlantis isn't just a place. Maybe it's a question the ocean keeps asking. What happens to greatness when it's forgotten? What if something extraordinary fell, not because it failed, but because it became too heavy for the world above? And what if it's still there? dreaming quietly beneath the waves, sending ripples up through the water, disrupting radios, steering ships just slightly off course, calling softly to those who are still listening. We don't know. We may never know. But every now and then, when a plane disappears or a sonar scan returns an impossible shape, or a diver feels something ancient move beneath their fins, we remember. We whisper the name, Atlantis, and the sea says nothing. Sometimes when the world doesn't make sense, we blame the stories. We call them myths, tall tales, tricks of memory. But what if the stories were right and it was our understanding that's still too small? That's where physics comes in. Not the kind you had in high school, not the bouncing balls and ramps and pulleys. The other kind, the kind that deals with space and time and things that bend. Because there's a theory, a few actually, that what we experience in places like the Bermuda Triangle isn't just strange weather or magnetic mischief. It's distortion of space, of time, of the invisible fabric that holds everything together. Einstein told us that time and space aren't separate. They're woven together in a thing called space-time. And that fabric, like any fabric, can wrinkle. It can stretch, it can fold, and under the right conditions, it can even twist. Usually we think of black holes or the edge of the universe, but what if in some rare places here on Earth something similar is happening on a smaller scale? What if the triangle isn't a triangle at all, but a soft spot, a thin place, a seam in the blanket? Physicists have long theorized about gravitational anomalies, areas where gravity behaves unexpectedly, tiny fluctuations, shifts in mass or curvature that ripple outward. If one existed beneath the ocean floor, perhaps due to a dense mineral deposit or even a pocket of dark matter, we might not notice it with our eyes. But planes might feel it. Ships might drift into it. Instruments might twitch. And time might slow, or skip, or fold back in on itself like a tide pulling in two directions at once. Then there's the idea of closed time-like curves. These are paths through space-time that loop back on themselves, allowing for the theoretical possibility of time travel. They require extreme conditions like rotating black holes or vast energy fields, but again, we don't fully understand the ocean floor. And maybe, just maybe, the Bermuda Triangle holds an echo of that kind of energy, a local ripple, a leftover wave from something ancient or cosmic, or both. Some scientists have even explored the possibility of micro-wormholes, tiny portals in space-time that blink in and out of existence. Most believe they're purely mathematical, but in areas where magnetism, gravity, and tectonic movement collide, like, say, the triangle, what if one opened? Just for a second, a bubble, a tear. Not big enough to suck in a city, but just enough to unpin a plane from its path, to displace a ship by a few hundred miles, or to make your watch say something it shouldn't. It sounds impossible. But so did the idea that time could slow near a black hole, or that light could bend, or that particles could be entangled across galaxies. Every generation has its limits, its no, that can't be real moments. And maybe the triangle is simply where our current understanding stares into something future generations will one day explain with ease. And yet there's something beautiful about not knowing, about standing on the deck of a boat or the runway of a small airport and knowing you're near a place where the rules might ripple, a place where physics might shrug and say, "We're still working on that part." Because even the most advanced equations can't yet describe what it feels like to fly through a cloud that moves like a thought, or to see the sky flicker like a skipped frame in an old film reel. So maybe the Bermuda Triangle isn't just where things vanish. Maybe it's where the universe lets go just a little, where space-time loosens, its tie leans back, and allows something peculiar to happen. Not always, not predictably, but just often enough to make us wonder, to make scientists write long papers filled with diagrams, to make pilots whisper stories over coffee, to make us lean a little closer to the night sky and ask, "What are you hiding?" And the universe, like the sea, doesn't answer. It just ripples. There's something funny about stories. Not funny like a joke, but funny like a shadow that's always just a step behind you. The moment something unexplainable happens, something just a little off, we tell someone. A friend, a stranger, maybe ourselves in a notebook. And once it's told, it starts to change. It grows teeth, it grows memory, and sometimes it grows wings. That's what happened with the Bermuda Triangle. It didn't begin as a myth. It began as a handful of reports scattered across time like seashells on a quiet beach. A ship didn't arrive. A plane went missing. A radio went silent. But then came the storytellers, the writers, the filmmakers, the curious and the dramatic. And they did what storytellers have always done. They gave the mystery shape. They gave it a name. They gave it a triangle. In 1950, a journalist named Edward Van Winkle Jones wrote a short piece in the Miami Herald, noting a few unexplained disappearances in the Atlantic. That article was quiet, just facts. No smoke, but it was a match. But it was a... 14 years later, writer Vincent Gaddis lit the fire with an article in Argosy magazine calling it the Deadly Bermuda Triangle. He drew the lines, he gave it a boundary, and suddenly the ocean had an outline for our imagination to fill. More articles followed, then books, then documentaries. The 1970s saw an explosion of triangle content titles like The Bermuda Triangle, Limbo of the Lost, and Into the Bermuda Triangle. The covers showed planes spiraling ships, vanishing clouds swirling like portals. People couldn't get enough. And who could blame them? It was the perfect mystery. The sea, the sky, the silence. Television wasn't far behind. Programs like In Search of and Unsolved Mysteries turned late-night living rooms into haunted shores, grainy reenactments, ominous music narrators with voices like wind in empty hallways. They didn't need to prove anything, they just needed to suggest. And suggestions, when told well, become belief. Suddenly, the Bermuda Triangle wasn't just a place. It was a mood, a genre, a corner of culture. It showed up in cartoons, in music, in sitcom punchlines. Children grew up knowing about it before they knew where it was. It became the ocean's version of Bigfoot, half legend, half location. And here's the strange part. The more stories were told, the more stories appeared. People began reporting things that fit the script. A pilot gets disoriented, must be the triangle. A boat hits bad weather and disappears, triangle again. We began seeing the shape, even where it wasn't. And in doing so, we may have created a self-feeding myth. A loop. The media shaped the mystery, and the mystery shaped the media, like two mirrors facing each other reflecting forever. But it's not manipulation. It's not a lie. It's something softer, something human. We make meaning, we crave narrative, and when faced with the unknown, we build frameworks to hold it. The Bermuda Triangle became a frame. And into it, we placed every ship that vanished, every compass that twitched, every silence that rang louder than noise. Even now, when new documentaries are made or YouTube videos go viral, they rarely offer answers. They offer atmosphere, suspense, the feeling that you're on the edge of something unsolvable. And we love that feeling. We don't watch to learn. We watch to feel the hairs on our arms stand up, to wonder, to let the world stretch out a little more than usual. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe the role of media isn't to explain everything, but to keep the questions alive, to remind us that not everything fits into a headline or a data sheet, that some places, some stories are meant to be told again and again, even if we never find their center. Maybe the Bermuda Triangle is one of those stories, a kind of cultural campfire. And every time someone writes another article or makes another video or whispers another theory into the night, they're adding wood to that fire, keeping it burning, keeping it warm, keeping it strange. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real power of the triangle. Not that it makes things vanish, but that it keeps us coming back, eyes wide, maps open, minds just slightly tilted toward the impossible. After all the stories, all the disappearances, and dizzying theories, it's tempting to lean back and ask the one question that hangs quietly over every mystery. Is there a pattern? Is it really chaos? Or is there something hidden beneath it, moving quietly like a current under calm water? Because if the Bermuda Triangle is as dangerous and mysterious as we believe, there must be some kind of rhythm to its madness. A pulse, a footprint, something. And so people started looking. Charts were made, databases built, coordinates plotted, decades of disappearances pinned to digital maps like stars in a strange constellation. And as the points began to form, some people saw something that looked an awful lot like order. One researcher noticed clusters, hotspots, where incidents seemed to concentrate. Another noticed that many disappearances occurred during specific months, especially in the transition between seasons when the atmosphere above the ocean becomes unstable, moody. Others pointed to sea lanes and flight paths, heavily trafficked arteries, where even a small rate of accidents would yield large numbers over time. And there it was, logic. Maybe not the kind that ends in certainty, but enough to make you pause. Maybe it's not that the Bermuda Triangle is more dangerous. Maybe it's that more people pass through it. More ships, more planes, more chances for something to go wrong. But that logic, while comforting, has its gaps, because some patterns didn't make sense. Some disappearances happened in perfect weather. Some flights vanished minutes from landing. Some ships were found adrift, engines, silent meals, still warm, crews gone. In many cases, the patterns weren't helpful. They were unsettling, like finding handprints on the inside of a locked door. There was the case of ships reporting strange lights before losing contact. The pilots who radioed calm voices then went silent without panic. Vessels that reappeared hundreds of miles off course with no signs of struggle or distress. The data was messy, but human memory isn't data. It remembers feelings. And the feeling behind these stories wasn't just loss, it was interruption. As if something stepped in mid-sentence and said no further. Some patterns went deeper. Insurance companies noticed that claims from the Bermuda region were statistically significant, not off the charts, but persistent. Enough to raise eyebrows, not enough to rewrite textbooks. Military logs showed repeated instances of brief disorientation or temporary equipment malfunction that, while minor, clustered strangely along the same coordinates again and again, almost like the place itself was pulsing. Not in violence, but in influence. Not always breaking things, but bending them, just enough to matter. And then there's the rhythm of silence, the way many incidents followed long periods of nothing. Lulls, as if the triangle were sleeping, waiting. Then clusters, a flurry of disappearances in the same month. Then nothing again. It feels more like breath than data. Expansion, contraction. A place that inhales mystery and exhales stories. Of course, statisticians will tell you that humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We find faces in clouds, meaning in randomness. They're not wrong, but sometimes patterns aren't just what we invent, they're what we sense. Like animals before an earthquake. Like knowing a song will end before it does. The triangle may not follow rules, but it does seem to have a personality. Quiet, unpredictable, watching. So, is there logic behind the chaos? Maybe. But maybe we've been asking the wrong question. Maybe the real mystery isn't in the numbers or maps. Maybe it's in the fact that we keep looking. That even in the age of satellites and simulations, something about this stretch of ocean refuses to be reduced. It stays fluid, unresolved. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't need to break the rules, it just needs to make us doubt them. And that alone is powerful, because what we call chaos might just be a pattern we don't understand yet. One day, perhaps someone will draw the final line, connect the last dot, and the triangle will no longer be a mystery, just math. But until then, we drift in the in-between, charting losses, asking questions, finding shapes in the fog. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. Every mystery comes to a crossroads. On one side, the people who were there, the ones who felt something, saw something, survived something. And on the other, the skeptics, the voices that say, it didn't happen like that, or worse, it didn't happen at all. In the Bermuda Triangle, this divide is not just philosophical, it's emotional. It's personal. Because when a pilot says they flew into a cloud that erased time, they're not telling a campfire story, they're telling a memory. And when a scientist says that can't be replicated, they're not trying to insult, they're trying to protect reality. And somewhere between those two truths floats the triangle. Let's start with the survivors, the ones who made it back. Their stories are scattered but eerily similar. An hour lost, a compass that spun, a fog that felt heavy, an engine that cut out then restarted on its own. They don't come with photos, they rarely come with proof, but they come with detail, with faces that tighten slightly at certain words, with voices that soften when they remember how quiet the world suddenly became. These are people trained to trust instruments, procedures, logic, and yet in that strange pocket of sea and sky logic stepped aside, and something else stepped in. One pilot who had flown for decades described the feeling as being inside a dream while fully awake. Not fear, not even confusion, just detachment, like watching the world through thick glass. And when it ended, when the systems came back and the sky cleared, it felt like surfacing from somewhere deeper than the clouds. Another recalled landing earlier than he should have. The fuel untouched the radio team at base, baffled. "I have no way to explain it," he said, "and I've stopped trying. Now listen to the skeptics. Calm voices, charts, data. There's no physical evidence of any anomaly in that region, they'll say. It's one of the most traveled parts of the ocean. True. And disorientation happens. Pilots make mistakes. Weather changes fast. Ocean currents scatter wreckage. All true. There's nothing mysterious about people disappearing in dangerous environments. Again, technically correct. But here's the trouble with facts: they explain what happened. They don't always explain how it felt. You can tell a sailor he was caught in a squall, but it won't erase the sound he heard on the radio before it hit the voice that didn't sound human. You can tell a pilot his instruments failed due to magnetic deviation, but it won't explain why his hands were shaking, or why time felt elastic, or why he never flew that route again. Skeptics look for patterns in behavior. Survivors remember pressure in their chest. This isn't to say one side is wrong, just that they speak different languages. One speaks in spreadsheets, the other in shadows. One wants to close the book, the other still smells the ocean every time they close their eyes. And in between we sit, listening, weighing, wondering. It's possible, of course, that many of the Triangle's most famous tales have simple explanations. A faulty compass, a tired pilot, a wave that came too fast. But that doesn't mean the mystery isn't real. It just means it lives in the tension between belief and disbelief. And maybe that's where it's supposed to live. Maybe the Bermuda Triangle exists not on the map, but in the conversation. A place we enter when we ask, what if they're both right? Because maybe the survivor didn't imagine the fog, and maybe the fog doesn't need to be paranormal to be terrifying. Maybe the skeptic is right about the data, but wrong about the silence. Maybe we don't have to choose between science and story. Maybe the real mystery is how often they overlap, how often a human experience falls outside the margins of a spreadsheet. And maybe at the end of the day, we don't need answers. We just need space to ask questions, to listen without rushing to explain, to let the survivor speak, to let the skeptic analyze, to keep the triangle alive, not as a myth, but as a mirror one that shows us how much we still don't know, and how badly we want to. We live in the age of seeing everything. Satellites orbit silently overhead, snapping photos of melting glaciers, jungle clearings, abandoned roads. Submarines glide beneath the waves, mapping trenches and tracking fish as casually as your GPS tracks your morning coffee run. We have drones that land on Mars, rovers that send selfies from 150 million miles away. So here's the question that hums quietly in the background of every Bermuda Triangle conversation with all this tech. Why don't we know what's under there? The Bermuda Triangle isn't vast by satellite standards. It's just a triangle-shaped patch of ocean. Yet, when we look down from orbit, we don't see ancient cities. We don't see lost aircraft carriers. We see blue. So much blue. But blue doesn't mean empty. Blue just means hidden. Because satellites mostly look at the surface. They see the top of the sea clouds, waves, storms. They don't peer through miles of water. Not really. That's where submarines come in. The deep divers. The ones who move without bubbles, without sunlight, without ceremony. And some of the most advanced ones in the world have passed through the triangle. Quietly, regularly. But their data, we don't get to see much of it. The U.S. Navy, for example, runs extensive undersea operations through Autech, right on the edge of the triangle. It's a testing ground for sonar, for torpedoes, for unmanned vehicles that swim like sharks and blink like satellites. And yet we've never received a press release saying, "By the way, we found something odd." But silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means containment. Sonar scans have mapped huge swaths of the ocean floor, but only in stripes, only in pieces. It's like trying to understand a mural by looking through a keyhole. And even when we do get scans, there's interpretation. A shadow could be a rock. A smooth curve could be a coral-covered wing. A blip could be a fish, or something the sonar wasn't ready to explain. And most scans are done for navigation, not exploration. They're not looking for secrets. They're looking to avoid collisions. Then there's satellite altimetry, a fancy term for using satellites to detect gravitational anomalies beneath the ocean by watching how sea levels subtly shift. This method has revealed strange underwater ridges, some of which align suspiciously well with ancient land bridge theories. But again, the data isn't detailed. It's like seeing bumps under a blanket. You know something's there, but not what. Meanwhile, autonomous underwater vehicles, robots designed to map the seabed, have reported magnetic disruptions and pressure shifts in certain parts of the triangle. Nothing dramatic, just small anomalies. Enough to mess with sensors, enough to require recalibration, enough to leave questions. But those logs don't end up on Wikipedia. They sit quietly in data vaults labeled routine interference, unexplained. And then there are the private companies. Oil surveyors, telecom giants laying fiber optic cables across the Atlantic floor. They run the most detailed scans of all, looking for stability, depth, and safety. And sometimes they find things, rectangular patterns, long ridges, cavities too perfect to be natural. But those scans are proprietary, corporate secrets, because no one wants their billion-dollar cable to run through a rock formation no one can explain. So here we are, surrounded by satellites, submarines, and sonar, with technology that can count penguins from space. And yet in this one stretch of water, we're still guessing, still speculating, still wondering. Is that a pyramid or a hill? A sunken ship or a sonar glitch? Is the silence a result of absence or of censorship? Maybe we don't find answers because we're not asking the right questions. Maybe we're not scanning deep enough, or maybe we already did and the answer wasn't what we expected. Maybe we were looking for wreckage and found something older, stranger. Something that didn't fit the catalog, something that didn't want to be found, or maybe the sea is just bigger than us, smarter than us, better at hiding than we are at looking. And all the satellites and submarines and blinking little dots can't change that. Not yet. But someday maybe one sonar sweep will echo back with something new, something undeniable, a shape, a sound, a silence too precise to be natural. And when it does, we'll lean in slowly, carefully, and the ocean will finally speak. Until then, we listen and scan and wait. Let's turn the light a little, not outward toward the ocean, but inward toward ourselves. Because after everything, after the disappearances, the data, the sonar shadows, and the scientific debates, there's one question that slips quietly into the room like a draft through an open window. What if we made it all up? Not maliciously, not with intent, but slowly, accidentally, brick by brick, story by story. Until one day we looked at this stretch of ocean and didn't just see water, we saw a mystery, a triangle, a legend, a brand, because the Bermuda Triangle, for all its eerie tales and tragic losses, has also become something else. A product, a plot device, a tourism hook. It's on t-shirts, book covers, and video game maps. It's a setting for cartoons and blockbusters and podcasts. It has become so famous that even people who've never seen a globe can point to it on an imaginary map. That kind of recognition doesn't come from silence. It comes from repetition. So where did it start? With a few real events, yes, a lost flight, a missing ship, some weather that didn't behave. But then came the storytellers, the writers, the publishers who knew that mystery sells better than math, and the public who leaned in, who wanted not just facts but feelings, the awe, the fear, the possibility, because there's something comforting about an unexplained space. It reminds us the world isn't done surprising us. It gives us permission to wonder. And so the triangle grew not just in rumor, but in structure. A few disappearances became a theory. The theory became a genre, and the genre became a phenomenon. The more we talked about it, the more real it felt. The more we searched for patterns, the more we found them. Not because they were always there, but because we wanted them to be. Because a world with triangles is more interesting than a world without. Does that mean the whole thing is fake? Not at all. Disappearances happened. People were lost. Lives were altered. But what's real isn't always what's retold. And sometimes the story that survives isn't the one that explains the most. It's the one that echoes loudest in the dark. We like stories with shape. We like when the world fits inside lines and symbols. So when someone drew a triangle between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, something clicked. Not because it solved anything, but because it gave the unknown an outline. It made the chaos feel contained, a tidy edge for a very messy sea. And maybe that's the real power of myth, not to deceive, but to give the unexplainable a home, a narrative, a voice. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't just absorb ships, it absorbs meaning. It becomes whatever we need it to be. A cautionary tale, a symbol of human vulnerability, a reminder that some questions deserve to stay open. So, yes, it's possible the myth has been shaped, massaged, edited, enhanced. Not by one person, but by all of us. By decades of fascination. By headlines that needed drama. By documentaries that needed mystery. By viewers like us who didn't want the answer to be pilot error or storm surge. We wanted something bigger. We wanted the ocean to have secrets. And maybe it does, but maybe we also added a few of our own. In the end, the triangle might be part mystery, part mirror, a reflection of our hunger for wonder, our fear of the unexplained, our need to believe that there are still places on this planet where science hasn't turned the lights all the way on. And that belief, whether manufactured or inherited or whispered over time, might be the most powerful force of all. Why do we keep coming back to it? The Bermuda Triangle, the mystery, the silence, the vanishing things. Why does a stretch of water hold our attention longer than a textbook or a news feed or a weather report ever could? We have countless explanations now, scientific papers, flight records, historical data, but even with all that, we're still here, still watching, still wondering, still whispering about it long after we've turned off the screen. Maybe it's not about the ocean at all. Maybe it's about us. You see, mystery does something to the mind. It scratches an itch that facts can't reach. It lights up parts of the brain that don't activate when everything makes sense. We are pattern seekers, yes, but more than that, we are meaning seekers. And when something doesn't fit, we lean in closer. We squint. We invent. Not because we're gullible, but because we're wired for story. Wired to connect dots even when they're invisible. A plane vanishes. It becomes more than a tragedy. It becomes a question, a window, a mirror, and mystery. Real mystery is rare. The modern world runs on answers, on updates, on timelines and troubleshooting guides, but the Bermuda Triangle sits quietly between all that. It doesn't explain, it doesn't argue, it just waits. And in that waiting, our imagination stretches. We fill the gap with what we fear, what we hope, what we secretly believe about how strange the universe might actually be. Some psychologists say that mystery activates the same part of the brain as reward anticipation, that we chase the unknown not for closure, but for the thrill of pursuit. It's like the moment before a coin lands. Anything is possible. And we love that moment more than the answer itself. That's why so many people fall asleep to stories of unsolved things, not just for comfort, but for contact. Contact with the feeling that the world is still deeper than it looks, that under the surface of reality, something unsorted still breathes. The Bermuda Triangle offers that feeling, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in small, persistent nudges. A vanishing ship, a fog that doesn't behave, a compass that forgets how to point. It gives us just enough to believe without ever confirming anything. And maybe there's something evolutionary in that. Our ancestors needed to pay attention to the uncertain, the rustle in the trees, the shadow that didn't belong. We survived by wondering, what if? That instinct didn't go away. It just found new shadows to chase. The triangle is one of them. A modern myth, yes, but also a psychological anchor. A place where we practice awe. Where we give ourselves permission to say, I don't know, without shame. Because not knowing can be beautiful. It keeps us soft, humble, curious. It reminds us we haven't outgrown the universe, that there are still places on this planet in our lifetime that resist full comprehension. And in a world that asks us to move fast, to multitask, to always have an answer. Ready. The triangle whispers something radical. Pause. So why are we obsessed? Maybe because the mystery isn't just in the water, it's in us, in our need for stories that don't end, for places that don't behave, for maps that still have margins. The Bermuda Triangle gives us all of that. A myth we can shape, a silence we can fill, a question we can carry quietly, comfortably, curiously into the night. Somewhere between the facts and the fog, the Bermuda Triangle did something few mysteries ever managed to do. It broke through. It left the newspaper headlines, the dusty flight logs, the old Navy memos, and became culture. Not just conspiracy theory culture or bedtime story culture, but real mainstream flashing on your TV screen culture. It became a character, a setting, a symbol, something you could reference in a punchline, drop into a movie, or design a theme park ride around. It started showing up everywhere, quietly at first. A background plot in a paperback novel, a news segment late at night with spooky music. Then it got louder. And before long, the triangle wasn't just a mystery of the sea, it was an icon of the imagination. In the 1970s, just as pop culture itself was beginning to explore the fringes. UFOs. Bigfoot time travel, the triangle, became a household name. Books like The Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz flew off the shelves, blending documented cases with dramatic flair, feeding a generation hungry for the unknown. Berlitz didn't just report the stories, he curated them. And people loved it. Loved the suggestion that something vast and strange was still happening under our noses. Television followed quickly. Documentaries aired on networks that normally stuck to wars and weather. Actors with gravelly voices narrated reenactments of vanishing pilots and ghost ships. Fog machines and slow zooms made it feel real, even if it wasn't. Then came the movies, sci-fi thrillers, disaster films, low-budget mysteries. The triangle became the perfect set piece, a stretch of ocean where logic could be suspended and anything could happen. Spaceships, ancient relics, time loops, a place where plot holes weren't mistakes, they were the setting. Even children's cartoons picked it up. Scooby-Doo, G.I. Joe. The X-Files, Doctor Who, all took turns sending their characters into the mist. Because even kids knew what the Bermuda Triangle was. You didn't have to explain it. You just said the name and everyone understood something weird is about to happen. And maybe that's the most powerful thing about pop culture. It doesn't just reflect what we believe, it shapes it. The more we saw the triangle on screens in books and board games and arcade machines, the more real it felt. It didn't matter if the story was true. It mattered that it was told over and over, until it sank into our collective memory like a lighthouse in the mist, blinking silent, always just visible on the edge of reason. Even music got involved. Songs mentioned it. Album art depicted it. For a time, the Bermuda Triangle was the perfect metaphor for confusion, for loss, for mystery, even for love. You disappeared like a ship in the triangle, became a lyric, a feeling, a cultural shorthand for the unexplainable departure, and all of it added to the myth, not because it offered evidence, but because it offered emotion, recognition, connection. And so, through all this, the triangle stopped being just a place. It became a feeling, the sense that something could go missing without a sound. That mystery might still live in our world. That the unknown wasn't gone, it had just found a really good PR team. And even now, long after the trend has cooled, the Bermuda Triangle still appears. In TikToks, in memes, in late-night YouTube videos with glowing thumbnails and titles in all caps. It lives in the background of our imagination, always ready to be summoned with just 3 words. So was the mystery built by the media? Maybe. But that's not the whole truth. Because the media doesn't invent interest, it amplifies it. The Bermuda Triangle didn't survive in pop culture because it was spooky. It survived because we never stopped needing places like it. Spaces where anything might be true, where stories don't end, where reality has a little give. And so it floats not just in the ocean, but in our bookshelves, our screens, our dreams. Not as a case to be closed, but as a door we keep propped open, just in case something still wants to come through. Not all mysteries are shouted. Some are whispered in footnotes, in margins, in quiet warnings tucked into handbooks written for people who fly too high or sail too far. If you want to know what a government really thinks of a place like the Bermuda Triangle, you don't start with conspiracy theories. You start with the manuals, the binders issued to young pilots and sailors, the protocols, the checklists, the things no one questions because they're printed in black and white and handed out with a uniform. And here's what's interesting. Flip through official U.S. Navy or FAA training materials, and you won't find the Bermuda Triangle boldly circled in red. You won't find chapters titled Unexplained Phenomena. There's no page that says, Beware this zone. On the surface, the triangle doesn't exist. Not officially. Not in the way we talk about it. And yet, it's there. In small, quiet ways. In procedural anomalies. In the way instructors pause slightly before certain modules. In subtle redundancies added to checklists for missions that pass through that area. In recommendations to double-check your heading even if your gear says you're fine. You start to see patterns not of belief, but of caution. A quiet respect for something no one's supposed to acknowledge. Some flight schools near the Atlantic coast include a little extra briefing for students flying southeast. Not mandatory, just suggested. Stories passed between instructors. Stories that don't show up in textbooks. Stories that start with, I don't know if I believe in that stuff, but just in case. And sometimes that just in case carries more weight than the manual itself. Naval training includes detailed studies of ocean currents, microclimates, electromagnetic interference. It has to. The ocean is unforgiving. But in the triangle, there's an added layer. Emphasis on communication protocols, on maintaining visual contact, on reporting even minor instrument discrepancies. Instructors may not say the word triangle, but their tone shifts. Their eyes hold something just behind the lesson. They've heard things, maybe seen things, maybe lost someone. And their silence is louder than a page of bullet points. Even commercial aviation has its quiet codes. Alternate flight paths that avoid the heart of the region during certain weather patterns. Recurrent simulator scenarios based on incidents that were never fully explained. Pilots flying through the area often keep one eye on the instruments, another on the sky, and a third, if they could, on something they can't quite name. And when something strange happens, it's rarely written up as such. Temporary loss of signal. Instrument deviation. Weather anomaly. The reports use safe words, familiar ones, words that don't get flagged or questioned. But read enough of them and you start to feel the shape of something between the lines. Something no one wants to write down. Something that won't fit in a report, but sits quietly in the back of every trained mind that crosses those waters. Because training isn't just about what to do. It's about where to be careful, where to slow down, where to trust your gut even when the gauges disagree. And the Bermuda Triangle, whatever you call it, has earned that kind of caution. Not through superstition, but through repetition. Too many blips, too many silences, too many moments that didn't make sense but were never spoken of again. So no, the manuals don't confirm the mystery. But they don't deny it either. They do something more human, more honest. They acknowledge the edges. They teach you how to fly through them safely, how to keep your voice calm when the compass spins, how to stay steady when the ocean feels like it's watching. And maybe that's the best evidence we have. Not the pages, but the pauses. Not the rules, but the way they're taught. Because sometimes the most revealing thing a system can do is quietly prepare you for something it doesn't quite believe in. There's something strange that happens when a mystery becomes profitable. It stops being just a question, it becomes a product. And when that product sells well, the mystery doesn't have to grow deeper. It just has to keep going. The Bermuda Triangle may have started as a real puzzle, a quiet series of disappearances, but somewhere along the way, it became something else. A brand, a business, a neatly packaged slice of fear that fits perfectly on a bookshelf, a tour brochure, a streaming homepage, and the numbers. They speak louder than the waves. Books about the Triangle have sold millions. Not dozens, not thousands, millions. From the 1970s through today, publishers discovered something both powerful and deeply human were drawn to stories that don't end. Charles Berlitz's The Bermuda Triangle became a runaway bestseller, not because it answered anything, but because it asked the right questions. It had just the right tone, urgent, curious, slightly breathless. And people devoured it. They wanted to be close to the edge of something vast and unknowable, from the safety of their armchairs. It wasn't just a book, it was an experience. Documentaries followed, radio specials, magazine features with moody cover art, and titles like Vanished Without a Trace or The Sea That Swallows. The formula was simple, dim lighting, mysterious music, and narration that always ended in a question. Facts were often optional, eyewitnesses were ideal. And the result, ratings. Lots of them. Producers realized that the Triangle didn't need resolution, it just needed airtime. Every time someone asked, but what really happened to Flight 19, another special got greenlit. Then came tourism. Cruise lines started running routes near the edge of the Triangle, some even advertising it. Hotels in Bermuda, the Bahamas, and Florida quietly leaned into the myth. Stay near the world's greatest mystery. Shops sold maps with phantom routes, coffee mugs with vanishing ships, shirts that said I survived the Bermuda Triangle to people who'd never left land. And for many, that was enough. The mystery became part of the vacation. A story you could bring home, a thrill you could wear. And while most of it was harmless, there's something worth noticing in all this. Fear, when softened into entertainment, becomes currency. The mystery doesn't need to be real, it just needs to feel real long enough for someone to buy in. And the Triangle offered the perfect balance. Just enough science to anchor it, just enough speculation to inflate it, just enough tragedy to respect it, just enough distance to enjoy it. It became a playground for curiosity, a safe place to flirt with fear. And for businesses, it was a dream. Because mysteries don't depreciate, they recycle. Every new generation hears the word Bermuda Triangle and feels that familiar tingle. And the market opens again. Of course, there's a cost. When money gets involved, truth gets blurry. Stories get polished. Timelines get bent. A theory that doesn't fit the narrative gets ignored. And slowly what started as a question becomes a commodity. The danger becomes aesthetic. The people who disappeared become footnotes in someone's travel vlog. And the ocean, quiet and immense, becomes a backdrop for profit. But maybe that's inevitable. We're storytellers, and stories are never just stories. They're also products, beliefs, industries. The Bermuda Triangle didn't just survive on mystery, it survived on value. Emotional value, cultural value, and yes, financial value. And maybe in a strange way, that's what keeps it alive. Not because it needs to be solved, but because it still sells. So when we ask, why does the mystery still exist, we might need to look less at the clouds and more at the catalogs. Less at the radar, more at the runtime. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't that we don't know what's going on in the Bermuda Triangle. It's that maybe we do, and we're just better off not saying it out loud, because mystery, after all, is good business. Let's talk about now. Not the 1940s, not ancient myths. Right now, with all our blinking satellites, GPS constellations, autopilot systems, and digital maps that can tell you which side of the street your coffee shop is on, we're not navigating by stars anymore. We're navigating by code, lines of data bouncing between the sky and our screens. And so you'd think logically comfortably that the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle would be over. A relic. Something quaint, like worrying about sea monsters in the age of submarines. But here's the strange thing, it's not over. Not entirely. Modern ships and aircraft still cross the triangle daily. Thousands of them. And most of them make it just fine. Smooth flights, calm seas, everything on schedule. But every now and then, a report surfaces. A strange glitch. A moment of silence. A plane diverted for no clear reason. A ship reporting a temporary loss of signal, then reappearing right where it should be, as if nothing had happened. These aren't disappearances, they're disturbances, not dramatic enough for headlines, just enough for the people who were there to remember something felt off. And that's what modern technology has given us, not certainty, but contrast. Because now when something does go wrong, we have more ways to measure it, to record it, to notice that for 10 seconds the GPS froze, that the autopilot blinked, that the sky darkened unnaturally fast on a clear day. Things that were once chalked up to weird weather now leave digital fingerprints. And sometimes those prints don't line up with the logs. In 2015, a cargo ship called El Faro sank in the Triangle during Hurricane Joaquin. Now, hurricanes aren't mysterious. They're brutal but explainable. And yet questions lingered. Why did the experienced crew choose that path? Why did communications drop so suddenly? Why did GPS and weather systems seem misaligned in the critical moments? The ship had every modern tool. It should have been safe, but it wasn't. And that's the thing. Technology doesn't eliminate risk, it just gives us more precise ways to feel helpless. When a ship disappears now, we don't just lose it. We lose a signal, a ping, a trail of data that ends mid-sentence. And that somehow feels worse, because we expect answers. We expect the blinking dot to always blink. When it doesn't, we don't just feel confused, we feel betrayed. Modern navigation systems are marvels. Inertial guidance, real-time satellite updates, weather overlays, digital compasses that auto-correct for magnetic variation. Pilots now have layers of redundancy backup systems upon backup systems. And yet, redundancy doesn't cancel out reality, it only prepares for it. And in the triangle, reality still bends sometimes, briefly, quietly, but enough. Pilots flying through the region today often do so with a kind of professional calm. They don't fear the triangle, but many still log anomalies, instruments that drift slightly, altimeters that need recalibration mid-flight, GPS that briefly jumps, then returns to normal. Nothing that breaks protocol. Just weird. And then it passes, like a cold patch of air you can't quite explain. Even undersea autonomous submarines have reported strange sensor interference. Not often, but enough to file a note. Enough for engineers to say, that's odd, and move on. Because what else can you do? You run diagnostics. You restart the system. You tell yourself it's just the ocean being moody. So, is it still dangerous? Technically no more than any other oceanic region. Statistically probably less. But danger isn't just in the data, it's in the feeling. And in the triangle, that feeling hasn't entirely gone away. Even with all our tools, all our tech, all our reassurances, it's still there. A sliver of unease, a pause before takeoff, a second glance at the radar. Not because we expect something to happen, but because deep down, we know we're flying into a place that doesn't always behave. And sometimes, for reasons we can't measure, the tech doesn't either. There's something different about flying at night. The sky isn't black, it's endless. Your cockpit glows in soft greens and reds like the inside of a quiet spaceship. The hum of the engines is steady, and the instruments blink like stars pretending to be certain. But outside there's nothing. Just air and ocean, and the occasional flicker of lightning so far away, it feels like someone else's storm. And when you're flying over the Bermuda Triangle at night that nothing feels heavier. I remember the first time. The briefing was normal. the flight plan routine. A straight line from Florida down toward the Caribbean. I'd flown it before. I wasn't thinking about myths or mysteries. I was thinking about fuel efficiency, cruising altitude, and how good the coffee smelled before takeoff. But a few hours in, as we passed over the open ocean, something shifted, not violently, just subtly. The moonlight dimmed like a curtain had been pulled across it, and for a moment the ocean disappeared. Not in the literal sense. I knew it was still there. But the horizon vanished. The distinction between sky and sea blurred until the world outside the window became a single shade of gray-blue. Instruments were fine, everything normal, but the feeling not normal. My co-pilot said nothing, but I noticed the way he adjusted his headset, the way he checked the compass twice, then again. The way he didn't look outside for the rest of that stretch. The strangest thing is how quiet it gets. You'd think the drone of engines would fill the silence, but it doesn't. It amplifies it, makes it sharper, like background noise with nothing to distract you from the fact that you're suspended between worlds, trusting sensors more than your own eyes. That trust is everything. But in the triangle, it sometimes feels thinner, not broken, just tentative, like even the avionics are holding their breath. There was one moment I still think about. No turbulence, no cloud, just a strange echo in the radio, like a second voice slightly behind ours mimicking our call-outs. It stopped the moment we noticed. We logged it. Nothing came of it. Maybe a radio reflection, maybe interference, or maybe the ocean was just playing games. Pilots talk, but not on the record. You'll hear stories over drinks. Quiet ones. I lost GPS for 30 seconds, came back, and I was 10 miles off path. Weather radar showed nothing, but I flew through rain anyway. The altimeter bounced for no reason. Most laugh it off. Professionals, no drama. But the ones who've flown it at night, they always have one story they don't quite know how to explain. And it always ends with probably nothing. But still, I've flown over that stretch many times now. Most flights are uneventful, smooth, routine. But even on the calmest night, there's always a moment, usually somewhere between 25 and 30 degrees north latitude, where I sit up a little straighter, watch the instruments just a little more closely. And sometimes I think, what am I watching for really? A light, a sound, a sudden tug in the gut that says, this is the spot. I don't believe in portals or sea monsters, but I believe in intuition, in patterns that don't show up in data, but whisper in experience. I believe in places that carry weight, places where thousands of feet in the air still feels too close to something below. And when I'm flying over the triangle at night, I don't fear it, but I don't forget where I am either, because the stars out there feel farther away. The silence feels deeper. And if you ask me what's really inside the Bermuda Triangle, I'll just smile and say I don't know. But at night it knows you're there. Maybe the Bermuda Triangle was never meant to be solved. Maybe it was meant to stay open like a door we walk past sometimes, just to feel the cool air drift out. We've traced the myths. We've flown with pilots, sailed with shadows, scanned the ocean floor, and asked all the questions a curious heart can hold. And yet, after all of it, the mystery remains. Not because the answers aren't out there, but because maybe they aren't the point. Mystery, after all, is a kind of permission. It lets us imagine. It reminds us there are still places where data doesn't get the final word. Still corners of the world where silence carries more meaning than 1,000 pages of explanation. The Bermuda Triangle might just be one of those corners, a soft spot in the world's fabric where things are allowed to be unfinished, where the unknown isn't a problem to fix, but a companion to travel with. And maybe that's why it endures, because deep down, we all need a place like this, a place where questions can float, where fear and wonder share the same seat, where reality leaves just enough room for story to breathe. The triangle is that room, not on a map, but in the imagination. And whether you believe in the myths or in the math, you're still a part of it, just by listening. So tonight, as the sea rocks quietly beneath the stars and the wind runs its fingers through the clouds, let's leave the mystery as we found it, whole unsettled and gently humming in the background. Let's let it live, not because it can't be solved, but because something in us doesn't want it to be. Sleep well, dear traveler. And if you ever find yourself flying over quiet water with only the hum of the engines and a sky full of questions, look down, not for answers, just to remember that somewhere between what we know and what we dream, the triangle is still waiting, still wondering, still watching, and the story continues.